The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
All these voices. All these voices. All these things you can't explain. All these painful memories. They keep haunting you and daunting me. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoke and gasoline. It's just a ghost of you and me. Of you and me.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Staring into the Abyss. I am your host, horror author James Hershey Jr., and with me as always, my co-host, old boy James Ash. How you doing, brother?
I am doing pretty good. How is everyone?
Tonight's episode is going to be interesting. We're going to be talking about it's like an offshoot of a Native American legend of the Thunderbird, and this took place in Tombstone. And there's an article that was published very recently about it. And that is what I was going to read you tonight. But instead, I decided to read you a little bit older article that has a lot more information. So we're going to go with that. The title of this article is Tombstone Thunderbird. Two cowboys had a bizarre confrontation with a thunderbird, which had varied widely in the telling. It is from TrueWestMagazine.com, and it was published March 30th, 2018, and written by Marshall Trimble. The most celebrated Thunderbird encounter took place in 1890 on the desert sands of what was then the Arizona Territory. Two cowboys had a bizarre confrontation, which has varied widely in the telling, but the gist of the story is this. They saw a giant flying bird, shot and killed it with their rifles, and carried its spectacular carcass into town. A report in the April 26, 1890 Tombstone Epigraph listed the creature's wingspan as an alarming 160 feet, and noted that the bird was about 92 feet long, about 50 inches around at the middle, and had a head about 8 feet long. The beast was said to have no feathers, but a smooth skin and wing flaps composed of a thick and nearly transparent membrane that was easily penetrated by a bullet. Perhaps the hardest part of this story to swallow is that two horses could manage to haul a dead behemoth like this for any distance. Sounds like a typical tall tale of the Wild West, and that's probably what it is. But it apparently does contain a kernel of truth. In 1970, Harry McClure claimed that as a boy, he knew the two cowboys from the story later on in their lives, and they had told him a different version of the events. McClure said that the giant bird they saw in the desert actually had a wingspan of more like 20 to 30 feet, which is much more reasonable than the 160 feet, but is still enormous. The two riders shot at the creature, but it was out of range. Their horses were very spooked and refused to chase the creature. So the men rode back into town empty-handed, and they were just carrying the news that they had seen this thing and it got away. That is the story that came from the actual cowboys, according to this gentleman. The Tombstone newspaper printed its highly embroidered version of the cowboy sighting, which was spared from fading into obscurity by its inclusion in a 1930 book on the Old West. In 1963, the story came to the attention of writer Jack Pearl, who revived the tale for an article in a pulpy men's adventure magazine called Saga. As if the epigraph report hadn't spiced up the facts enough already, Pearl liberally embellished the encounter into a dramatic rip-snorter entitled Monster Bird That Carries Off Human Beings. Pearl pushed the date of the encounter back to 1886, and he described the witnesses as two prospectors who killed the bird and proudly showed off their trophy in Tombstone. Pearl also added some extra conflict by telling of how a second Thunderbird snatched up a heckler who had ridiculed the prospectors and flew away with him in its talons. But Pearl's most significant editorialization was this. He said that the Epigraph newspaper story had run with a photograph of the giant bird's carcass nailed up to a wall with its mighty wingspan unfurled, and a number of men posing next to it for scale. This part of the legend, the Thunderbird photo, has taken on a life of its own. Pearl's fictional account of a photograph of Old West settlers with a big dead bird was picked up and repeated time and again, multiplying and evolving just as it had before Pearl ever got a hold of it. In time, people who heard the story began to believe that they had previously seen the photo with their own eyes. Somehow, people felt convinced that they had once marveled at the strange picture in some old book or newspaper, often noting that they didn't realize the significance of the photo at the time and regretting that they had not kept it. The details might differ from one recollection to the other, with some recalling the bird had feathers and others saying it looked more like a pterodactyl, and some thinking that the bird was nailed to a wall and others remembering that it was held with wings outstretched by a large group of men. But no matter what the specifics, each person feels certain his or her memory is true. Many have reported that they saw the Thunderbird photo in Fate, National Geographic, Grit, or some other similar publication. But entire archives of these periodicals have been searched, and no Thunderbird discovered. The experts in the cryptozoology field are no less susceptible to Thunderbird recollections than the common layman, with Ivan T. Sanderson and John A. Keel among those who claim to have once held the photo in their hands. Some accounts of seeing the photo are amazingly precise and hard to disregard. It's difficult to tell someone that an experience as vivid as that never really happened. But what is the alternative? What's the word with the Thunderbird? The best explanation for the phantom photo phenomenon is that these are memories of things that never existed. It might simply be that people have read descriptions of the cowboys and the giant bird that were so colorful and evocative that their imaginations created a near tangible mental image of the scene. As the controversy surrounding false memory syndrome has demonstrated, the things we think we recall can be distorted by external suggestion, mismatched fragments of things that did happen, and maybe even debris from the collective subconscious. Some might view this line of reasoning as party-pooping skepticism, but if it's correct, what it reveals about the mysteries of the human mind is way more interesting than any big bird could ever hope to be. And that is the end of this article. So the basic story is that two cowboys were out riding. They saw this thing in the sky, this giant bird that looks like a pterodactyl, and they shot at it. According to the one gentleman who claims to have known one of the cowboys, the story is they missed and they went back to town and said, hey, we saw this thing, but we didn't get it. But according to this article, the Tombstone Epigraph printed a story claiming that they brought it back to town. Supposedly, according to this book that was later published, there was a photograph. Now they're saying that that was made up, that it wasn't true. But all kinds of people say they've seen it. So what is true about this story and what is not true about this story? That's the question. Well, I have the actual news article from the Tombstone Epitaph that was published on April 26, 1890. So I'm going to read this article to you. This is the actual article that all of this is based on, that ran in 1890. A winged monster resembling a huge alligator with an extremely elongated tail and an immense pair of wings was found on the desert between the Whetstone and Huachuca, I think is how you say it, Huachuca Mountains, last Sunday by two ranchers who were returning home from the Huachucas. The creature was evidently greatly exhausted by a long flight, and when discovered was able to fly but a short distance at a time. After the first shock of wild amazement had passed, the two men who were on horseback and armed with Winchester rifles regained sufficient courage to pursue the monster, and after an exciting chase of several miles, succeeded in getting near enough to open fire with their rifles and wounding it. The creature then turned on the men, but owing to its exhausted condition, they were able to keep out of its way, and after a few well-directed shots, The monster partly rolled over and remained motionless. The men cautiously approached, their horses snorting with terror, and found that the creature was dead. They then proceeded to make an examination and found that it measured about 92 feet in length, and the greatest diameter was about 50 inches. The monster had only 2 feet, these being situated a short distance in front of where the wings were joined to the body. The head, as near as they could judge, was about 8 feet long, the jaws being thickly set with strong, sharp teeth. Its eyes were as large as a dinner plate and protruded about halfway from the head. They had some difficulty in measuring the wings as they were partly folded under the body, but finally got one straightened out sufficiently to get a measurement of 78 feet, making the total length from tip to tip about 160 feet. The wings were composed of a thick and nearly transparent membrane and were devoid of feathers or hair, as was the entire body. The skin of the body was comparatively smooth and easily penetrated by a bullet. The men cut off a small portion of the tip of one wing and took it home with them. Late last night, one of them arrived in this city for supplies and to make the necessary preparations to skin the creature, when the hide will be sent east for examination by the eminent scientist of the day. The finder returned early this morning accompanied by several prominent men, who will endeavor to bring the strange creature to this city before it is mutilated. And that is the end of this article. So there's a few differences here from what the other article said and what the actual newspaper article said. Now, in the other article, they're talking about this thing is flying through the sky, and the ranchers see it. They don't call them ranchers, they call them cowboys, but the cowboys see it, and they shoot at it and kill it, okay? In the actual newspaper article from Tombstone in 1890, we find that this creature was not flying through the sky, like the article said, that it was actually on the ground because it was exhausted from flying, and it was trying to make its way away from these people, but it was having a hard time because it was so tired. So the men were able to wound it with a couple shots and follow it and eventually get to the point where they could kill it. Quite a bit different than what the article claiming that it wasn't a true story said. Another difference is one of the key points of the first article I read you was their assertion that there's no way they could have brought this thing back to town because how could two men on horseback haul that big creature? Well, in this actual article about it from 1890, we learned that they didn't. They cut a piece of the wing off and brought it back with them to prove that the creature was there and existed. And then they went back to get the creature with a whole team of people to haul it back. So that doesn't seem like it is too out of the realm of possibility. So what we have to ask ourselves is it possible that this could be true? We have a creature that looked like what they're describing called the pterodactyl. We know that it existed, 100%. Did they know that it existed? That's another question we need to answer here. This was in 1890 that this was published, which was actually 106 years after the first pterodactyl was discovered. Well, actually, it was the first pterosaur that was discovered because there's many different versions of pterosaurs, one of which is the pterodactyl. But they knew about this kind of dinosaur since 1784. That's when it was first discovered. So it's very possible that the person writing the article for the paper there in Tombstone could have known that pterodactyls existed and could have known what they look like. So they could have had knowledge of pterodactyls. They also definitely would have had knowledge of the Thunderbird legends from the native cultures. They absolutely would have known that. So it's possible they could have made the story up because they had all the information to plug in the facts to say, here it is. Now, if they didn't know that the pterodactyl existed yet, then I would say that that would be a strong clue that maybe it was true because they describe perfectly a pterodactyl. How would they know what it looks like if it hadn't been discovered? But 1784, they absolutely could have known. The next thing I want to talk about quickly is the photograph. Now, this is something that has gone absolutely crazy since then. There are all kinds of people that have claimed to have seen the photograph. There are all kinds of different photographs online that claim to be the photograph. But as of yet, the actual photograph has never surfaced. It is believed that all the photographs online are not that photograph, that they're not it. And it wasn't until 1963, which was 33 years after the book by Bell, okay, and 73 years after the ranchers killed this thing, if it's true that they did, that anyone ever even talked about a photograph. That was by Jack Pearl in Saga magazine. So for all that time, nobody mentioned a photograph until he did in 1963. So that kind of has to make you go, wait a minute. If you look at the original article in the original Tombstone paper, it doesn't have a picture. There is no picture included. With a little bit of research, I found that they didn't even have the ability to put pictures in that paper. There were no pictures in the Tombstone epitaph. There were none, ever, because they didn't have the ability to put the pictures in it when they printed it. So the idea that there was a photograph taken of this thing and put in that article is 100% false. It has to be, because there's no way they could have put the photograph in, if they even possessed it. So we know that that is not true. Is there an actual photograph of this creature? Probably not, is what I'm going to say, because it wasn't even brought up until 1963. Nobody talked about it. Now remember, there was a book written about this 33 years before that never mentioned a photograph. The newspaper article never mentions a photograph. It's not until 1963 that they talk about this photograph. And in that same article for Saga magazine that Jack Pearl wrote, he got the date wrong. Okay, he said 1886 and it was published in 1890, the article. So there's a lot of things in that article that Pearl wrote that are completely wrong. And a lot of people say completely made up. So there we go. That answers that question, kind of. Is it possible there's a photograph? Maybe. I mean, it's not impossible, but do I think there is? No, I honestly, I don't believe that there is at all. Now, I said before that a lot of people remember seeing this photograph, or at least claim to remember seeing this photograph. Now, they're saying that they're remembering something that never happened. I always like to give the benefit of the doubt to witnesses and take their claims seriously until it's proven not to be true. So they gave a lot of different places where they claim to have seen this photograph in all the different reports. You have the original paper, you have National Geographic, you have all kinds of different magazines and newspapers that were listed as where the people saw these photographs. So the only thing to do in that situation is you search all of those publications, and that has been done multiple times. I have not personally searched every single issue of all of those publications, but they have all been searched multiple times trying to find this photograph by multiple different people who research this very topic and are trying to prove the existence of this photo. Okay, they're not trying to disprove it, they're trying to prove that it's there. So they searched diligently to try to find this photograph in every single issue of every single one of these that are listed by all the different witnesses. To this date that we're recording this show, all of those issues and periodicals and magazines and newspapers, all of them have been searched. Every issue. And there has been no photograph found that has ever been published in any of those sources that match the photograph described in 1963. There's never even been a photograph of cowboys and pterodactyls published. So I would say that most likely that photograph does not exist. If it did exist, it has never been published anywhere that we can find. But I don't think that it exists. So is the story true? That's the question. Did two cowboys actually see a pterodactyl flying around in the desert and shoot it? The way to look at this, I think, is to try to see if there's been any other reports anywhere else. And as it turns out, that a creature that matches this description was seen several times from 1881 to 1886 in the Elizabeth Lake area of California. And it was seen, the last sighting of it, they saw it flying eastward. And they never saw it again after that in that area. Now it's kind of interesting that it got killed supposedly there in Tombstone, Arizona in 1890. So 4 years after the last sighting in California, this thing flew east. 4 years later, it's spotted in Tombstone, Arizona, and supposedly killed, according to the original newspaper article on it. And never seen again after that day. There's never been reports again in that area of seeing this creature. Now, you have reports nowadays of people that claim to have seen Thunderbirds, but you kind of, nowadays witness reports are a little bit different because nowadays we have TV and internet and all that, and everybody wants to be famous. So you have a lot of people that make up a lot of crap to try to get their name out there and be something. And a lot of times when you run them down, they're not true. Now, I'm not saying all witness accounts are garbage because, believe me, I don't think that. I put a lot of stock in witness reports. But what I am telling you is maybe 10% of all the witness reports that you get are actual true witness reports. And 90% are either complete fakes intentionally, or they are someone seeing something but it not being what they thought it was. So it's misidentification of some animal species or something like that that they think is something that it's not. And when you look into it, oh, well, it's just this. That makes sense. That's 90% of witness reports turn out that way. But you have 10% of them that have no other explanation, that could seriously be evidence of something being there. Now, the 90-10 percentages is a generalization. Those aren't the exact numbers. I haven't done the math. But I'm telling you from my experience, that's kind of the way it feels. That 90%, 9 out of 10 are garbage, 1 out of 10 is good. But there's never been another one in that time period that I know about after it was supposedly killed in 1890. So I'm going to say it's possible that whatever was flying around there in California from 1881 to 1886 that matched this description might have been killed in Tombstone, Arizona in 1890. That's possible. Now, did they haul it back into town, or did they shoot at it and it got away and ended up going somewhere and dying? Who knows? I would think if they brought it into town like was claimed, it would be somewhere. Somebody would have it, right? There would be some sort of study of it. They said they were going to skin it and send the skin back to scientists in the East. How come we never got any reports about that? How come there was never any papers written on it saying this mystery creature found in Tombstone, Arizona, this is what we think it is, this is what it looks like, here's its bones? Why has there never been any scientific papers written on it? I would say that's because it was never any skin sent to any scientist or any remains at all sent to any scientist from this. Does that mean that it didn't happen? Not necessarily. I think if this did happen, I think probably what happened is these two guys saw it, shot at it a bunch of times, and it got away. And they came back and said, hey, it got away. Here's a piece of it. Maybe they shot and knocked a piece of it off. Maybe some of the skin got shot off or something and fell. And they grabbed it. And they said, hey, look, we got a piece of it. And that's it. And the thing got away. Because they say they're going to send a team out there to get it, but they never say in the original article that they brought it back. Just that they were going to go get it. So who knows what ended up happening there. So I think if it did happen, that's the way it probably went down. These guys shot at it, probably hit it. Because back then, I mean, you used your gun a whole lot more than you do today. And people were a lot more proficient with their firearms than most people are today. So they were a lot better shots. So most likely, if they shot at it a bunch of times, they probably hit it. And it just got away. And it went off somewhere and died. And we never heard anything about it because it was dead. It was never seen again because it was dead. And we never got the bones or the skin or anything like that because it went off somewhere and died. And nobody ever found it because it's the desert. It'll get covered over in sand within a pretty quick amount of time. It wouldn't take but a couple weeks probably, and it'd be covered over. If that, depending on the weather. If you have a sandstorm, it could be covered over that day. So I think that's probably what ended up happening. There is the chance that this was complete nonsense, that it wasn't true at all. But why would a paper write that? It doesn't make sense. Now, they claim that the reason why that story was written, that it 100% isn't true, and the reason it was written was because this was after the gold rush and the mining and all that stuff was kind of dying down. So Tombstone wasn't what Tombstone was in the Wyatt Earp days. Tombstone was getting to be a ghost town with barely anybody left there. And so they did it to try to draw people to the area. That's what the claims are by people today that are saying that this isn't true. Is there any truth to that? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I don't know if that was a practice that the Tombstone paper carried out on a regular basis of printing sensational, weird stories to get people to come in. I haven't seen them. So I don't think that they would do that on purpose, because that doesn't make any sense to me why you would do that. That's not going to draw a ton of people that are going to come into the town, buy supplies, spend their money there and live there. I just don't see it happening. It might draw a few, but I don't see a great rush of people coming in to try to find some creature that they shot. Now, if they had the creature, right, if they shot it, killed it, and brought it in and said, we have this creature on display, that might draw some people in. I don't know. I think that either it didn't happen, or if it did happen, they shot it and it got away. And it was never brought back. So that's what I think about it. So I'm going to throw over to Old Boy and get his opinion on it and basically just see what his theories are. Go ahead, brother.
Thank you. And you know what? I've always liked the Thunderbird story because it's just been one of my favorites, because they've been talking about this even before the Arizona thing, guys. They've been talking about it in the mountains of Utah for a while. They have pictures of ancestor Indians at that time had drawn pictures of the thing on walls. You could see drawings, and they've been talking about it in Utah, California. I even heard. Now the story in Arizona, like James was just talking about, is what I think is the picture's probably not real. I think that was made up. I just agree with him on that. And it could be a possibility what he was saying. It might have been the same creature from California flying around. And it's the desert. I live in the desert. You don't find a lot of things because it dies and gets eaten. There's coyotes, what else is there? in the desert. In California, there's snakes, coyotes, bobcats come from the mountains, and I live in California, so it happens. We get mountain lions, bobcats, so something might have ate it too. Think about it, guys, or wild dogs. So that's a possibility. Do I believe the picture? No. I believe it could be a big stunt to get people to come back because no one was going to Tombstone anymore. But now people do go back to Tombstone because of the paranormal stuff now. So later on, and they found something else, because it's supposed to be haunted there. So Tombstone is getting popular again, but not for that reason. It's because what happened at Tombstone, because the movie, and then the paranormal stuff that goes on, because there's a lot of paranormal stuff that goes on in Arizona, guys, and California deserts. A lot of Indian burial grounds, a lot of stuff that happened in California, Arizona, New Mexico areas. There's even a road in Mexico it changed. It used to be 666. That was what it was nicknamed. They changed the name to something else because so many people have died or they've seen some kind of weird creature or something. But this is getting off subject. The Thunderbird might have been real, and like James said, they probably didn't get a piece of it and take it in, because then they were more efficient with rifles because they used them a lot to hunt. Back then, you had to hunt for a lot of stuff. It wasn't you go to AM/PM or 7-Eleven and go grab yourself a burger at Burger King or a drink, a Big Gulp. You had to go out and hunt for your dinner, because if you didn't, what people don't get, it snows in this part of the desert. In some parts of northern Arizona, it snows. We're right by the mountains. It gets freezing. It gets in the 20s, teens. People don't realize you don't, in the wintertime, you don't absorb the heat. The heat doesn't absorb into the desert. So it's freezing. People have died here if they got trapped because there was a story, a guy was driving around a motorcycle. He had a fin jacket on, but he broke down, coming to find out the weather got under the teens. It got to 9 degrees. It was one of the worst winters that year, got below the teens at that time. It was 9 or 8 degrees. He died. He just froze to death. He got stuck in the middle desert. It happens. Now, there's stuff in this desert where I live. I've heard about the Thunderbird since I was a kid, because I've heard this story before, not in Arizona, but I heard there was a legend that thing flew around. There's also the Devil's Punch Bowl. There's supposed to be something over there too, because it's a crazy looking punch bowl in the middle of the desert. And there's supposed to be something there too. I've heard a legend. It could be just a rumor. But there's crazy things in this desert. Chupacabra. There's something that chased me when I lived in this desert. It was huge. It was huge. And I seen it with my own eyes 2 different times. It looked like a kangaroo with a lion's head. And it was long. I swear I've seen it numerous times, and I have witnesses to it. But I might believe there was something. I think they probably hit it, fell out somewhere, and it died. Maybe. Might have even healed and went somewhere else, but it probably died. I don't think they sent it away and it got to a museum or something. And that's a possibility. Somebody said, shut up, don't make sure this stuff, because we know how certain things don't want to come out because they don't want to scare people. We know how that works, so they could have hit it too. That's a possibility, and it could be a fake story, and that's a big possibility too. I'll give that about a 20-30% chance to get people to come back to Tombstone. I believe that could be a possibility on that one. That's a very good possibility. Now, what I think happened is, I'm going to go along with James's story. I think they probably took shots at it, hit it, fell somewhere, strangled along till it died. Might have even had a cave. So we'll never know, because people used to mine out here. California, there's mining ore, gold, silver. I live right by Calico Ghost Town, but before Calico was a ghost town, that was a big booming place of gold. San Francisco, Arizona, Tombstone, a lot of stuff was going on here. There's caves. There's big mine shafts, especially in the San Bernardino mountains. So it could have just went into its cave and died. We're not talking about Rodan from Godzilla, because that was a 250 foot wingspan. It was like 300 feet tall. That's that's what it sounds like. It's kind of funny. But do I believe in giant birds? Yes. I've heard stories of them. They talked about it on Monster Quest and stuff. And I used to watch all that. And pictures of things that come out now, and those some of them are probably exaggerated or faked and lied about. That's how people want to be famous. But I do believe there's something there. I watched that about the Thunderbird. It's always been a cool story because I believe pterodactyls may exist still. But the problem is, well, why haven't we seen it? Well, we didn't see gorillas to the early 19th century, 20th century. They didn't think they existed, and they did. So there's the CFM. I'm probably destroying the word. The Siliphan. James talks about how that was supposed to be extinct, and it's still around. The giant squid. We can't see that hardly ever, and it exists now. We've proven it, but we've only seen it a handful of times. So it's a possibility. What I think, if it does exist, we know about it, and we've captured it, and we have it somewhere hidden, or we've killed it already, and we just keep it quiet because we don't have too many. There wasn't too many left, and we basically got rid of it. Or, and he's saying a giant crocodile, but that sounds weird because that's even weird. Maybe it was a different kind of species of its cousin, or it evolved to something else. Maybe it was a different kind of pterodactyl. It wasn't probably the same pterodactyl it was, 10 million years ago? It was probably something else because it sounded weird what they said, an alligator. But back then, it was the 1890s, so it could have been what they just described what the creature looked like. I believe there was dinosaurs up to a couple thousand years. I think that's where they get the behemoths and these monsters that you read about, like the Hydra and stuff like that. I don't think it was a 7-headed monster. Maybe what I think it was a dinosaur. It was deformed. It had 2 heads, and that happens sometimes with snakes. Snakes have 2 or 3 heads. It happens. And that's what happened, and they called it a Hydra. And I think that's the whole story on that one. I'm getting off subject, guys. But I'm just saying about that, how these legends come. And we're talking about this flying Thunderbird, or it could have been a giant bird that's extinct now. Maybe that was the last one left, and they killed it. It was a 60-foot bird that flew around, and we killed it. I wouldn't be surprised. They had giant everything back then. It could have been something that just survived, and that was the last one. We killed it off. Now it's over. We don't have it. But now they're saying they're seeing them again. So, do I believe they might be around? Maybe. I think we would have seen it by now, for sure. And they have, but I don't know if it's there anymore. I think that it might have died, or we captured it and we're not going to ever tell anybody the truth, or it could be just a big joke and a lie. And that could be a big possibility because money makes. If I tell you, maybe it wasn't going to last, but it brought people to see, a little bit more ticket sales for a couple months, and that was it. If I told people dinosaurs and I caught one, people are going to come. You're going to sell out for at least a couple years till people get tired of seeing it. Oh, we've seen it now. We know what it looks like. Just like with everything, people get bored. But that's the only way you're going to really make some big time money. If you caught something in it and you breeded it and you keep making different dinosaurs, then that will last longevity. People are going to come see it. They're going to pay to see stuff like that. And what else can we breed? Now, don't you think if there was a giant bird, people would be getting attacked all the time? I mean, I'm just saying, there's some people say they do, but you know how that goes. I want to be on TV. I'll tell you anything you want to hear. So you would hear a lot of attacks. I live in the middle of the desert in California. I live in the high desert, guys. I have seen some weird stuff. I've never seen a giant pterodactyl flying around here. I've heard stories back when I first got here, and it was 100 years ago, that there was something flying around, because we're right by Arizona, about 2.5 hours away. And then we're Tombstone, I think we're about 4 or 5 hours away. We're not too far from that. So I've heard stories of this rumor, and I believe the same thing like James says. I think it was probably exaggerated, and if it did exist, it probably flew away and died. But I haven't heard anybody getting flown away from a pterodactyl, and I've been here for 37 years now, almost 36, somewhere around there. So I've heard of the chupacabra. I've heard of Bigfoot up in the mountains, because I live literally by the San Bernardino Mountains. We've heard him being there. I've heard of creatures in the lake up there, and mammoth. I've heard of ghosts and monsters and coming out chasing people. The goat man, the lizard man by the border of Mexico, because I live only 3 hours away from Mexico. So here's how weird it is, guys. I live 3 hours away from Mexico. I live 2 hours and a half away from Nevada. I live 2 hours and 45 minutes to the border of Arizona, both sides of it. I live 10 hours away from Oregon. It's weird. I only live in 2 hours away from LA, 2 hours away from San Diego. I don't want to keep going, but that's it's I have everything by me. The mountains, the ocean, they're only hours away. It's not like I have to take a day off. I can just go there an hour or two and I'm there. And I live in the desert, gets very cold and it snows here. It snowed on the day after Christmas, it snowed on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, and it snowed on Thanksgiving. It's the first time it's happened in a long time here, but it happens. So we do get these some weird things out in this desert. I have seen it, but not a flying pterodactyl. I've never seen it. I've seen things that might have been UFOs, but I've never seen a flying pterodactyl. And I'm by Tombstone, not like right next to it, but I'm not far away from it. So I've heard of the story. I've heard this story before. I've seen the picture he's talking about. It's a great story to talk about. And we've always wanted to talk about the Thunderbirds. Now we got an excuse to talk about it. So I'm glad because it's an issue I've been wanting to talk about for at least a year, but we finally found something to really talk about, and it's a good subject that's coming out right now. So that's all I got to say. I agree with James. I think that's what the story is, what he basically said. I totally agree with him.
I think that the key here is the idea that there are species of dinosaur that could still be alive, or at least could still be alive at that time in 1890. Now, you might hear that listening right now and say, that's crazy. You are a madman. It's impossible. But is it really? There's a lot of species of shark that were around when the dinosaurs were around. Alligators, crocodiles were around when the dinosaurs were around. You had so many different species of insect and other things that were around when the dinosaurs were around. So the idea that something has survived all of this time, to me, is not far-fetched at all. We see it in nature all the time. And you also have certain species that fall more into the realm of cryptozoology than they do into the realm of regular zoology. I'm speaking, of course, about things like Nessie and Champ, the lake monsters, who some believe are plesiosaurs, or some other ancient species of dinosaur-like creature that has survived until modern times. You also have, down in the Congo, the Mukele Mimbe. This is a creature that has a rich history in the folklore of the area, tons of sightings by the locals, and it is at a point where there's actually been research teams that have went and looked for this thing because they believe that it exists because of all of the reports of it. This creature is, if you look at the description and the drawings that were made by the locals who have witnessed it, looks like a smaller version of a brontosaurus. So it is 100% a dinosaur. That's exactly what it looks like. So if Mukele Mimbe still exists, then that means that there's a dinosaur out there that is still alive today. So can dinosaurs still be alive today? Yes, of course they can. There's no reason why some of them couldn't be. Now, if they exist and we haven't found them yet, it is because they are in remote areas, such as the Congo, in the case of Mukele Mimbe, or the different lochs in Scotland, and the sea is where the Loch Ness Monster would live, or a big lake like Lake Champlain, where something like that can stay hidden underwater and it's harder to find. In this case, we're talking about desert. Now, you have to keep in mind that not too long before this, I mean, this is 1890, and not too long before this, that was all wilderness. If you go back 100 years, that's all wilderness. And really, the only people there are the native people. And there's a rich history of sightings of the Thunderbird by the native cultures. All the different tribes have it. So, could a pterodactyl-like creature have survived until that time period, considering that most of that land was still wild and nobody lived there? And the people that did live there, the native people that lived there, weren't out there cutting down the forest and building cabins and tearing everything up like white people do. They were living with nature. There's no reason why that thing couldn't have existed and survived. Now, if that is the case, if a pterosaur, I'm not going to say pterodactyl because I don't know what species this was for sure. Let's just say pterosaur because that covers many different types. If a pterosaur type dinosaur had survived, if you're talking a span of around 100 years, that's really not a long time. So even in the 1890s, when you had different mining towns that had popped up and you had the railroad come through and all that kind of stuff, you still didn't have giant major cities. You still didn't have millions and millions and millions of people concentrated in a small little area. So even during the 1890s, it is possible that a small handful of these things could have still been alive. Now we also look at the fact that this thing was spotted in California first, and it was in a remote area there. And then it came to Tombstone in that area out in the desert. So the desert was not a place, especially during that time period, but even today, it's not a place where a lot of people go and hang out because the desert sucks. Okay, I hate to give you that spoiler, but the desert sucks. It's no fun there. It's hot as hell in the summer. It's cold as hell at night. There's nothing to drink, usually. Now, you do have some little pools of water that happen in the rocks and stuff like that you can drink, but it doesn't get very much rain. It's not a very fertile place. You can't grow nothing there that is really good to eat. So it sucks. It's a very hostile environment. Most people don't want to go to the desert to hang out. Because of that, you don't have a gigantic population in the desert itself. You have people that live kind of on the outskirts of the desert, like Old Boy does, but it's not like he lives smack dab in the middle of the desert on a sand dune. You see what I'm saying? There's still area out there where people don't go. That's the area where they bury all the bodies and all that kind of stuff, out there, away from everything. It is possible that something like this could have survived. Now, do I think that you have a pterosaur that is alive today? I highly doubt it. It could be, but I highly doubt it because there's just too many damn people now. Even in the remote areas of the desert, some people go out there. And if you're talking about a creature that can fly, it can cover a lot of space. And that's another thing about this thing getting away from these cowboys. You got to think, they see it. It's up in the air, okay? It might be a couple hundred yards away. It might be several hundred yards away from them. They shoot at it. Let's say they wound it. I'm a hunter. I have shot a lot of animals in my life. When you shoot an animal, that animal is filled with adrenaline and it runs. Even if you make a good shot in the kill box, chances are that thing's not going to just drop where it's standing. It happens sometimes, but it's the exception, not the rule. Usually, the creature runs, and then you have to track it. Now, it'll run quite a long ways before it finally falls and dies. You can tell by the blood trail how long you're going to be walking. If the blood has a lot of bubbles in it, you know you hit lung and it's not going very far. If it doesn't, then there's a chance that you're going to be walking for a while. But even with a good shot, most times that animal is going to book it for a little while before you get to it. So you're in for a little bit of a walk to catch up to it, to finally find where it dies and track it. Now take that mindset, okay? Translate that to a creature that is very, very big and is flying. How much distance is that creature going to cover before it finally drops, if it's been shot? Let's say an animal runs, it might run half a mile or a mile before it falls, and you got to track it. If that same animal can fly, it's going to cover a lot more distance than that. So this thing might have ended up 10, 15, 20 miles away when it finally fell and died. Now, you got to think of these cowboys, they're down on the ground on horses. Are they going to travel 10 or 15 miles to try to find this thing if they didn't see it fall? Of course they're not. They might look around a little bit and they can't find it. The horses are freaked out, so they say to hell with it. I think that's what happened. I mean, if this story is true that they shot this thing, I think that's what happened. Because if you shoot that creature, it's going to book it for a while before it finally falls. Because it's going to be scared and it's going to have all that adrenaline rushing through it. And it's going to go. And if you're talking about something that flies, it goes a hell of a lot further, a lot faster than you can on foot. So it's going to cover way more distance. So I think that is exactly why they never found it or brought it back. So anyway, that's my thoughts on the matter. I hope that you guys enjoyed this show. I'm going to throw it back over to old boy and let him give his sum up and shout outs, and then we will wrap this one up.
Thank you, brother. Just so you know, I do actually live in the middle of the desert. Literally, where I live is you leave my park. I live in a modular home park, brand new. Miles for desert. I do live. You know what? I'm going to show him a picture because I never really told him. If I go out to my yard and get out of my neighborhood, there's literally just desert. I don't live by a lot of people where I'm at. I literally do live in the middle of the desert. I'm going to send you guys a video of it so he'll know what I'm talking about. So let's get that clear. Cause I think like I've told him before, I don't live by LA. I live minimally in the desert. So I've grown up in the desert before anybody moved here. It was hardly anybody here. There was no one around my house. Now it's because people are moving, but even where I'm at, I live right next to Bell Mountain, and there's the Walmart distribution plant, like scattered houses, but it's all desert. So I do live in the middle of the desert, guys, and not like out like in the Wild West, but I do live pretty much. So I wanted to clarify. I'm going to send him a video of me out in the middle of the desert because I literally walked maybe half a mile and I'm in the middle of the desert. So I'm going to send him a video so you guys can see it's actually less. It's like a quarter of a mile. So I'm going to show you guys, but just to clarify that. But yes, I hope you guys like this show. We always try to do something different now. Please leave your comments, and when you have, please subscribe to James Hershey's page. We have been doing this show and other things he's doing, the paranormal news. He's doing video games, the new Xbox coming out. We both tried to get it. It's sold out. We're both going to get it eventually. So we'll be making those videos, and those are going to be, the graphics are just going to be amazing. So you guys will get to see that. And James still playing around with the PlayStation 5, but that's him. If he gets it, that's on him. I'm sorry, but I'm just playing. But I'll be getting the Xbox for sure. So we'll be able to show those new videos. And I don't know what their technology in, because I know they run off of 5G. So, but go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube page. Remember, go to if you guys want merchandise, we sell masks, Clover mask. I'm gonna try to make another one. I'm gonna make a picture so he can do it. We can do another mask, so it's not just a common one. Get shirts, iPhone cases, whatever. Check it out. Just remember, give us more feedback. I might be giving some stuff away because it's Halloween, guys. It's October 1st, guys, and it's Halloween, and it's holiday season coming now. And one more thing is, I'm getting married on Halloween, so you guys will be able to watch that. So we'll put it on live. So just giving you a heads up. And I want to give a shout out to my friend JC's wife that was just in the hospital. He was in Shadow Pit with us, and he does Tells the Abyss with us. And I hope she gets better. She just got out of surgery, and I'm just going to leave it at that. Not going to get in detail, and I wish her the best, and JC the best to him and his family. Other than that be said, have a good night, Misfits, Sugar Ladies, Monster Lovers, and Demon Hunters. I love you, and blessed be, and have a great night.
Yeah, it's kind of cool that you tell me that, because you live in the middle of the desert. I live in the middle of the mountains, in the woods. So we're both kind of isolated from other people. You know what I mean? We're both kind of living out wild man style out in the wilderness. That's kind of neat. As Old Boy said, our hearts and our prayers go out to Shalia. Shalia, if you're listening, we love you, and you are absolutely in my prayers, dear. JC, you as well, brother. We are praying for you, and I would like to ask all the believers in the audience, if you could lift Shalia and JC up in prayer, that would be wonderful, because they are truly wonderful people, and we definitely love them, and we wish them the best. So with that being said, guys, the YouTube channel is youtube.com/James Hershey Jr. That's where everything is. You can go there, subscribe, and enjoy all the different videos. The merchandise store is teespring.com/stores/staring into the abyss. That's teespring.com/store with an S on the end /staring into the abyss. That's where all the merch is. There's shirts, hoodies, posters, pillows, all kinds of stuff. A bunch of different designs, a bunch of cool stuff. So if you're into merch and you want to support the show, that's a great way to do it. I want to thank you guys for watching tonight. And I kind of feel creepy, to be honest with you, because like I just did this cool show, and then we did this moment where we, talked about our friends who were going through it and asked for prayer and all that kind of stuff. And then it's like shameless plug time, and it just makes me feel creepy. So basically that's all I have to say tonight. I love you guys, and thank you very much for all the support that you give us. And we will catch you on the next one. Until we speak to you again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. God loves you, and so do we. Bye-bye.